We are practical people. We want to know how a thing works, what it does, what's it worth, how do we get it. We want to be good stewards of our resources. You know, the early Calvinists were taught to live simply, to dress plainly, to avoid extravagance and ostentation. We generally like our lives to be orderly, well-balanced, controlled. We see a problem, what do? We want to fix it. We can't stand waste and inefficiency. We look for real solutions to the problems that plague our society. We want to figure out what can we do with poverty and homelessness and violence and hunger. And most of the time, this pragmatic, practical spirit is a real blessing. No argument there. But sometimes a pragmatic spirit can get in the way of real life. Early in our marriage, Bunny and I were serving 2 small churches in rural eastern North Carolina, and we had to count every penny. Our anniversary was rolling around, and I knew that Bunny loved the gift of flowers. So, being of a practical turn of mind, I thought, well, I'll buy her some rose bushes for our anniversary, and then she'll be able to have, in that warm climate, roses most of the year. And so the day of our anniversary arrived, and I showed her the rose bushes. Well, I learned that day that there's a difference between rose bushes and a dozen cut red roses. But some of us are slow learners. One fall, Bunny got a new car, and so when Christmas came, I thought, well, what would be really nice to go with that new car? And I thought, car wash tickets, because if you buy a whole book, you get 2 free washes. So I got several books of car wash tickets, and then I needed to find just the right size box to wrap them in. So I hunted the house, and then I found it. It was a jewelry box. So there we were Christmas morning, unwrapping the gifts, and she unwrapped the box, and there was the jewelry box. And she opens it, car wash tickets. Car wash tickets. Well, even I finally got the point that there are times that call for something more than rose bushes and car wash tickets. For there is another side to life. There are moments in our lives when we come face to face with the impractical, the magnanimous, the extravagant. In our story from the Gospel of Luke, we find just such a moment. Jesus has been teaching the crowds about the ministry of John the Baptist and how the sinners and the tax collectors welcomed his message and were baptized by him, but how the scribes and the Pharisees wanted nothing to do with him. We don't know why, but for some reason, a Pharisee invites Jesus into his home. And in Luke's account, while he is reclining at the table, an unnamed woman enters the room. She is a sinner. And standing behind Jesus, she weeps. She bathes his feet with her tears, and she dries his feet with her unbound hair. And then she opens an alabaster jar of expensive ointment. And while she continues to kiss his feet, she rubs that precious oil into those road-weary feet. I can imagine that as the scent of perfume began to float in the air, a cry of shock and disgust rises from the Pharisee, the host. Allowing a sinful woman to perform such a disgraceful act is proof enough, he thinks, that Jesus cannot be the prophet. And yet, it is an extraordinary moment, a precious moment, a holy moment. And the moment becomes for us a study in contrast, for it reveals just how inhospitable and ungracious the host, the righteous Pharisee, has been, in contrast to the extravagant grace of an unnamed sinful woman of the city. And Jesus tells a short parable to illustrate the difference. The debtor who is forgiven the greater debt is the one who loves the most. The Pharisee Pharisee did not even practice, we learn, the common hospitality of the day. The Pharisee did not welcome Jesus with water to wash his feet. He did not embrace him with a kiss as an honored guest. He did not give him oil to anoint those broken and cracked feet. But the sinful woman, she bathed his feet with her tears. She dried his feet with her hair. She anointed those feet with precious oil. For having experienced the lavish grace of God, she knew that this was a moment for extravagant gratitude. I remember such a moment of profound grace when I was invited by a family to come in the dying hours of the father's life. He was kind of like the patriarch of many generations, and those generations gathered together in the home around his bed, and they laughed and they cried and they told stories, and they expressed to him their love and how much they would miss him, and we joined together in prayer. And then just moments before he died, like Jacob of old, he reached out and he blessed them. His death came peacefully. And there was the scent of a beautiful faith, a profound moment that filled the air like the fragrance of costly perfume. It was a holy moment. Paul Tillich, from whom I borrowed the title of this sermon, speaks of this woman's act as an act of holy waste that flows from the abundant heart of love. He writes that the early church knew that without the abundance of heart, nothing great can happen. He knew that religion, within the limits of reasonableness, is only a mutilated religion. That calculating love is no love at all. He writes that the history of mankind is the history of men and women who have wasted themselves and were not afraid to do so. Now, most of the time, we need to face our daily responsibilities carefully with dedication and practicality. We need to be responsible citizens and good parents, and we need to be hard workers. Every day we have an opportunity to plan our schedule carefully. My smartphone tells me when I need to leave the church in order to make a meeting on time. Now, whether I get there or not on time is another question. And my smartphone gives me step-to-step directions of how to get there. But there are holy places that not even Google Maps can find, and there are sacred times that not even an Outlook calendar can chart. There are moments that stand out from the ordinary flow of time, moments that demand something more of us. This is why Jesus says we do not live by bread alone. The practical is not always enough. And thank God for great artists and inspired composers and talented musicians and great architects who see what God is doing and then, inspired by God, create art and music and cathedrals. Thank God for people who, in gratitude to God, establish hospitals, schools, and new ministries in the Dominican Republic. Thank God for people who, in the midst of the busyness of life, take time to laugh, to embrace a friend, to spend time with a child, to give thanks for the sheer wonder of life. Thank God for the people who are moved by the lavish grace of God to build a home and habitat for strangers they do not even know, to educate children in Kenya, to provide the precious gift of time as they labor in our food pantry so we can reach out to hungry families in our community with the lavish grace of God. We cannot let the ticking of the clock be the measure of our lives. In T.S. Eliot's famous poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the speaker in an almost dreamlike state rummages through life and wonders about the meaning of his own life. He sees himself growing older, balder, thinner. He contemplates his failure of nerve, his missed opportunities. He's afraid and uneasy about asking the essential, eternal questions of life. Oh, he's known the questions. He's known the people who have crowded his life, and so he muses in the poem, "For I have known them already, known them all. I have known the evenings, mornings, and afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons." But when God has lavished so much grace upon us, we cannot measure out our lives by teaspoons. We cannot define ourselves simply in terms of what we do. We cannot define the value of a life apart from God. But when we begin to see God's hand behind every act of forgiveness and generosity, every moment of great courage and sacrifice, and every occasion of rebirth and reconciliation, we are moved beyond the practical and pragmatic to extravagant moments of holy waste. Thank God for those who waste their time in worship. Theologian Marva Dawn has described Christian worship as a waste of time. She writes, "To worship the Lord is, in the world's eyes, a waste of time, and it is indeed a royal waste of time. For by engaging in worship, we don't accomplish anything useful in our society's terms, but worship immerses us in the regal splendor of the King of the cosmos. And the worship of such a God immerses us in such a way of life, empowered by the Spirit who equips us with the ability and the humility to waste time in the love of neighbor. Worship, a royal waste of time." Yes, it is good to be practical, but in the midst of our practicality, it is even better to recognize those moments that call from you and me holy waste. Making sure that all the children of Indianapolis have food to eat. Taking time from an all too busy schedule to meet a lonely friend for coffee. Or sending flowers. And I mean, you know what I mean. I'm talking about that dozen cut red stem roses to a friend for no special reason except to say, "I love you." And we are here in this royal waste of time because at some moment in our lives we have discovered that in worship, in service, and in our spiritual community, we are not wasting time, but we are discovering the secret to the meaning of time. You know, each one of us here has been given an alabaster jar of precious ointment. And you know what it is, don't you? You know what it is, don't you? What is it? It's your life. And where is the place? And what is the moment that God is calling you to crack open that jar and pour out your life in an act of holy waste? Amen.